Hello and welcome once again to Baked Beans Garage, where I am a professional, only not at this. So today, instead of working on my large, rather rusty cars, I'm going to be working on my slightly smaller, slightly less rusty plastic cars. So go ahead and unsubscribe and leave a hateful comment down below me. So specifically today, I'm going to be showing you how to make, mold, and cast your own custom model car parts in a similar fashion that I made a 13B for this Datsun 620 here. It's rather pretty, and I'll show you that later. So, first things first, all of the products I use in this video can be found in this kit from Smooth On for mold making and casting. And aside from the horrendous graphic design on the box, all of the products in here are actually quite good. Now, by no means are the things in here made to make such tiny parts in two-part molds like this. However, they can be coerced to do so with decent results. We'll get to that later. So, without further ado, let's zoom in a little bit and get started. So now the first step in this painfully fun process is to get your master mold. Now there's two ways you can do it. If you want to make reproductions of an existing part, you can just steal it from another model kit, like I did the blower for this Monte Carlo here. But if you want to make your own custom part, you're going to have to spend countless hours gnawing at a couple chunks of styrene with your teeth in a chainsaw like I did for this 13B. Now, if you don't know what styrene is, what are you doing building models? Yeah, if you don't know what it is, it's just a very workable plastic that is extremely useful for making tiny models and railway stuff like this. So, if you're going to make your own master, you're obviously going to need some kind of scale reference so it looks right in the car. For that, I used this 13B rotor housing, which measures exactly, slightly, mostly out of frame, and when scaled down to 24th scale, that is exactly this big. So, being that the Datsun is a 24 scale model, that's going to look pretty much right. So there's a couple considerations you have to take when you're doing something like this. If you're doing something this intricate like an engine, you're going to have to break it up into many different parts. Like I have the oil pan, lower intake manifold, water pump, front cover, carburetor, alternator, header, all that fun stuff in separate molds. I'll get into why you have to break it up for mold lines and considerations you have to take when you're pouring the molds later. So now that you have your master mold fabric all pulled together, you can start working on the first half of your silicone mold. Now, to do that, the first thing you want to think about is where you're going to pour the resin in. And since these are a clamshell mold, you can't just pour it in like you would a two-dimensional mold. You need to make some kind of pour spout, like I have this hole in this half of the mold. So, all you do for that is you think about somewhere on this part that isn't going to be seen. In this case, right where the oil pan goes, so obviously you're not going to see that. And then you just glue a plastic stick or something right to where you're going to pour the resin in. And then when you make the other half of your mold, it's going to leave a hole, and now you can get resin in there. So to start building this, just get some Legos. Now, this isn't the best demonstrator. I don't have all my Legos because I got hungry earlier. All you do is you take your part. Just for demonstration, I got this V8 block from another model kit. You just take some wax-based modeling clay that you can get at Walmart or any craft store. It's not very tasty. So you just take that, you pack it in around the Legos, and then you squish your part right down in there. And you keep in mind, wherever that clay meets the model, that's where your mold line is going to be. So just keep in mind that you're going to have to clean up the flashing from those areas of the model. So put them somewhere that's not going to be a big deal. And by flashing, I mean the little bits of resin that ooze out through the halves of the mold. And then once all that clay is packed in around the model, squish it up against there so you have no gaps, so the mold compound doesn't sneak down underneath there and cause problems later. And then what I like to do is take some little bits of plastic and stick them in there to serve as alignment dowels for later, just to make it easier to align the two halves of the mold. Now, as you can see here, the part of the mold with the pour spout is going to be done second. It doesn't matter which one you do. You can do it on this half of the mold or later on the other half of the mold. I like to do it on the second half of the mold, that way you don't have to worry about the silicone oozing down and around and falling out the bottom, just making one big chunk of silicone, which is no good. So now that you have your master mold packed into the clay and your mold box ready to go, you can start pouring the mold. So these are the first products from the kit we're going to use. This is the mold making silicone. It comes in a cotton candy flavored pink variety and a blueberry flavored blue variety, part A and B. It's a 50-50 mix, but I find with this stuff you can be pretty far off of that exact 50-50 ratio and it still works semi-decently well. And this is a release agent that they give you. It comes with a little spray tip, but I don't like to use that because it's horrendously messy. I just put a little bit in a tiny little cup and then just brush it with a soft bristle brush all around the inside of this mold. And then in a slightly bigger tiny cup, take 50% this, 50% that, mix them together and just pour them right on in there. Now this stuff is quite thick and viscous, so you gotta be extra careful to scrape all the sides and the bottom of your mixing cup before you pour it in there. But like I said, you can be pretty far off and it still works. So now, once you've mixed that all up in a cup and you poured it right in there, fill it slightly over the top so it seeps out the edges a little bit, and then just take your mold and roll it around just to get that silicone settled in there, and then tap it, shake it, whatever you want to do to get the bubbles out. But what I find works best, if you have some kind of appliance that vibrates slightly like a washing machine, just set it on top of that and those slight little vibrations will make sure all the bubbles float up right out of there. Or if you want to go the full beans approach, toss it right into the washing machine and that'll give you even worse results because you know my complete lack of dedication and quality. So once you pour that, let it sit for about 7 hours. That's what this stuff takes to cure, and then you will be ready to pop out the first part of the mold. So since I'm not actually making a mold of that V8 block, I've gone back to my 13B master mold just for visualization's sake. Now this, like I said, I did the half of the mold with the pour spout first, so just to show you what that looks like. Now I forgot to mention, when you put the plastic in for the pour spout, use a fairly weak modeling cement. That way you can just twist it off later, break that loose, and then pull that right out. And I've already trimmed this up. Usually when you do this, that spills over and it makes all kinds of mess. So just take your X-Acto knife, trim those sides down, and then you're ready to pop out the first half of your mold. And if you're lucky, the master may or may not come with it. In this case it did. Pretend this is clay. And there you have the negative from your half clay mold. So now that I poured the first half of the mold and it's set, I took it out, removed all the clay, stuck the master cast back into it, and put all that back into the mold box. And at this point, all of the hard work is over, so you can sit back and crack open a ice cold non-branded beverage container. So once you have that done and you have your pour spout, all you do is you mix up some more casting goop, or molding goop rather, and you do the same thing. With this, the only problem I've run into is that the mold making compound likes to stick to itself more than anything else. So when you put on your release agent this time, make sure you give a nice liberal coating to the existing silicone in there to make it easier to pull apart later. So, and once you have that done, mix it up, pour it, do the same thing, give the tilt a shake, throw it in the washing machine with your laundry, and wait another 7 hours. And 7 hours later, we have another half of the mold. Like earlier, I already cut and trimmed all this, and this is just ready to pop out. And provided that you've done everything properly, you now have 2 nice exact halves of your mold, and you are ready to cast stuff. Now, This is very condensed. This took many hours of work, obviously, because I have lots and lots of other molds here for the rest of the engine's peripheral parts. But if you're only doing one big part, hopefully that'll save you all of that pain. So, by my dead reckoning, at this point everything has actually gone well and properly, which means hell is frozen over. So, at this point you have some molds, 2 halves of each, ready to make some parts. Now we're ready to break out the next half of the kit, which is the actual casting plastic itself. Now this stuff, part alpha, part bravo, they're both clear, water flavored. The bottles are deceptive. Still wouldn't recommend drinking it. It's very bitter and kind of a waxy taste, so not very palatable. But anyway, same as before, you can be pretty far off from 50-50 with these, but these are a little less lenient than the mold making silicone. So the technique that I use is I get a tiny bucket and I use 2 separate syringes. I'll have 3 syringes altogether, and use those markings to draw exactly the same amount of part A and part B into the cup. Mix them all up, then take your other syringe, which I didn't bother to clean out because these are disposable. You all, like I said, my complete lack of dedication to quality. And then once that's mixed up, you draw a little bit up into here. Nice and chunky. And then just inject it into your mold until you'll kind of feel it take a certain amount of resin, and then one of the sides will pop up a little bit and you'll get all the air to escape and a little bit of flashing come out. And then just kind of massage it a little bit, make sure the mold halves are seated before that stuff starts to harden, and just repeat it with all your molds, obviously. Now, like I said, this stuff isn't exactly ideal for this kind of mold making. Not only is it kind of thick when you first mix it, it sets very quickly, like 3 minutes pot life, then you're done. So if you're using this stuff, you're kind of stuck with doing 1 or 2 parts at a time, which isn't fun, but I got it to work. Now, more than anything, this process is trial and error. It's going to take a couple times for you to, learn the molds and get it to set properly. Case in point here, I had a couple flops, like this keg wasn't even full of resin, NFG at all. This one turned out semi-decently, but I still had a few little air bubbles. At least they were where I expected them to be, so that one is salvageable if I wanted to. And it took, probably 5 or 6 tries to actually get a decent one. What I ended up doing is taking a tiny brass tube and making a little adapter to stick it onto here, and then stuck the tube all the way down in the mold and filled it from the bottom to the top, which I found worked quite a lot better in evacuating all the air inside the mold. But I have since lost that, so I can't really show it. But I'm not mixing the stuff right now anyway, because I don't feel like making an even bigger mess than the first time I did this. It wasn't pretty. So once you got all your molds chock full of casting plastic, wait maybe 20 minutes till it's completely hardened, and you'll be ready to pull the parts out. So now that some time has passed, the casting resin has set. Usually this is all covered in the stuff, but like I said, I don't want to make a mess, so I'm not actually making parts this time. But now you get to actually pull the parts out of the mold and see how you did. Obviously just check for air bubbles, excessive flashing, all that jazz. But if you do experience such a failure to chooch, like a giant air bubble like in this one, or I don't know, I had a couple of these kegs that were only half full of resin, try again, because usually the problem is the part between the steering wheel and the driver's seat. So trial and error, just do it again. But after a few runs, I was able to finally produce a decent model, and then I did one more, and that came out the best of them all. So once you pull your molds out, just start cleaning up the flash and all the mold lines, which are usually pretty minimal because this silicone makes very good molds. And then start putting it together. One kind of pain in the ass I ran into was that for some reason this plastic does not work with normal modeling cements. I had to use cyanoacrylate glue or super glue for pretty much any part that attached to stuff made out of this. So, you know, word of caution. And if you were to use regular casting resin, you wouldn't have that problem, but this stuff's cheaper, so that's what we use. So, and now that you have everything molded and cleaned up, you finally get to plop it into a model. So after reviewing all the footage I have so far, and before I go showing off the finished model, I thought there were a few more things I should mention that I either forgot or that footage was just a little too cringy to use, and that's saying something by my standards. So first, something I forgot to mention that comes out of that Microsoft Paint themed box is this sealing agent. And you want to use this if your master mold is made out of a porous material like balsa wood or basswood or something like that. And that just fills in and seals up all those little pores so you don't mechanically lock the master mold into the mold compound, making it impossible to use the mold without, or get the master out without destroying the mold. And secondly, when I showed me taking this apart for the first time right after I poured the second half of the mold, it doesn't come apart quite so easily. These have a fair bit of stiction to them, so you kind of gotta peel it back semi-gently to get these mold halves to come apart. So now I believe that I've touched on everything I want to mention, and I can get to showing off the model. So I have come over to the window where the audio is worse but the lighting is better to show off the finished model. Now, if you haven't already noticed, this is a bit of a departure from my usual style of things that look like shit, in that this one is actually shiny. And there she is. So I'll put in some beauty shots later so you can actually see all the detail. This isn't quite doing it justice, but there she is, all painted up and weathered ever so slightly. This is me realizing I forgot a radiator fan. Rotaries don't like to overheat, do they? So that's just stuck in with some threads making up the wiring harness and the ignition leads, and a nice chrome air cleaner that I stole from another model because I didn't really feel like making one because I want to make other variants of this later. So yeah, that about wraps it up for this video. If you want to see more modeling based stuff as opposed to the real cars, let me know in the comments section below and I will try to do that. Hope this was helpful and or entertaining. Bye bye.